Hey, I'm Morgan, and this is the PS We Expire podcast.
For me, it's really harnessing in these small moments that we have from people that really make the biggest impact and difference in our lives that we never even can imagine. Because, really, from a learning science standpoint, the greatest synapse or emotional resonance you can have is when you have these deep connections with people. And we never know when it can happen. And the reality is, it can make you feel so much better. And it can also make the other person feel better with the dopamine that happens. So, really, it's in those small moments that you don't even anticipate that you can really leave the biggest impact.
I love that. Can you talk more about just learning? And I know like this is like a super broad topic, so we'll kind of drill down and sift through our conversation as it goes along. But like, talk to me about learning and what you mean by like these small points of connection.
Yeah, so from a learning standpoint, in terms of there's two things. You can think about behavior change, like moving behaviors forward, but you can also think about memories and something going into your long term memory and never forgetting that. Most of us think about things that have happened in our lives that are traumatic, like 9/11 is a great example where we never forget where we were, what happened in that moment, maybe what we were eating, what it smelt like, the environment we were in. So sometimes emotional resonance can be so strong, like in that case, that you never forget it. I was in a talk a few weeks ago and someone said, Gina, you said that people need to learn 7 ± 2 times to be able to and process it for your long term memory. And I said, well, that's on average. The
Mm.
reality is, you can have a moment in time because of novelty, because of the strength of that synapse, that you never forget it. That's why if you hear a song, maybe it happened at a point in your life that was really impart in you like a certain feeling. You never forget it. The melody with that music, with that moment, is something that you can recall 3 years down the road. I think of like Whitney Houston, So You Want to Dance with Somebody. It comes on and it elicits emotion and a feeling of goodness. And so you can have these stages of learning and memory and behavior change in a moment in time, or it can be because you have to reinforce and repeat something. This is commonly true if it's something that, number one, you're not inherently interested in, or maybe you are, but you have to have that repetition to be able to coordinate that hand and body movement to be able to reinforce that, to be able to apply that knowledge in the real world. And so, learning scientists study why we remember certain things, how we can bring those memories back to our working memory. And then also, when we know something like texting and driving, I wear this bracelet. I talk about it a lot. Like, we all know not to text and drive. I wear this as a commitment not to text and drive. That's a motivational theory, and that's different, but it's all tied to learning. And so I'm really passionate about it because when you can have these moments in time, you can help yourself move forward and you can help others and you can also learn from it.
So the three things that you said, and I'll just let you choose which kind of river we go down. One is that you talked about that novelty cuts down on the time needed to learn something new. You talked about hand and body movement and reinforcement, and then you talked about you use this phrase working memory, and maybe this is a place that we can start, is like the difference between working memory, long-term memory, and short-term memory.
So in your prefrontal cortex, you can recall and bring information to your consciousness. And so that is really your working memory. It's really the thoughts that are happening in the moment when you are thinking. And so right now, there are memories and thoughts that are actually in your long-term memory that you are not even thinking about. They're actually in your subconscious. And to be able to bring them up into your working memory is very important for you to be able to engage in the moment and to be able to think. So when you process information, what happens is information comes in through all of your senses. So whether it's your smell, whether it's your sight, whether it's sound, whether it's taste, whether it's touch, all of that is incorporated into the hand body movement. It's also incorporated into going into your short-term memory. So in your short-term memory, it's a place in your cortex that actually only stays for about a fourth to a half a second. Neuroscience have been studying this, and it does depend on a number of things, and everyone is unique in the way they process that information. But that is like an average of time that information stays in that space in your brain. So what happens then is you have to somehow reinforce, or you have to repeat that information. You have to make a significant memory or a neural synapse. You have to fire that information in a way that creates a meaningful connection. Your brain is made up of different webs of information or synapses that help you create this neural map or neural image of what you want to bring into your long-term memory. And so every time you learn, that map is reconnected. Those fires or those synapses refire and they reconnect in a way. So that's why you can unlearn something and relearn something. Because of neuroplasticity, we have the capacity to relearn and learn in different ways. And so your long-term memory, in fact, there are so many neural network and maps that have been made that you recall into your conscious when you need it. And so you have to be able to repeat information. So it's, if you don't have that strength of synapse when it happens, to be able to build those networks. So that's why when you think of athletes, they continue to practice. Like you think of a golf swing, you learn it, you have to continue to make it before it becomes automatic and you automatically do it. But like if you're like me, I'm a national tennis champion, and I will say that I still to this day will double fault. You saw like Serena Williams. I mean, sometimes, she goes up to serve and she misses the serve. And it's not that she doesn't know, it's those hand-eye body movements that you constantly have to retrain. And that's why complacency becomes so critically important, because you know something, but you've become complacent and you have to continue to re-engage your mind in how you think about it and how you process it to be able to perform it. And that's why I'm really passionate about continuing to think about learning and how we process information.
So so it sounds to me like our working memory is our conscious uh, perception of what's going on and what we're doing with the information, the thoughts that kind of arise on their own, and that the short-term memory and the long-term memory are subconscious processes. Am I thinking about this correctly?
Yeah, so your short-term memory is like the minute you bring in that information, it gets stored for a period of time, for a short period of time before you lose it. So you are conscious in your short-term memory.
Okay.
It's not unconscious. You're conscious, like your phone number. Like if you're trying to repeat a phone number, that's why there are so many like short digits. You're actually thinking about your thinking. But every hour after that, you're going to lose a large portion of that information because you're not thinking about it anymore. You actually lose it. So unless you continue to reinforce that information, you're going to lose it. It's not going to be in your long-term memory. So thinking about thinking is so important, and it is conscious and it is in your short-term memory, but your capacity to hold that is for a short period of time. So that's why, like if you're studying for a test, you can study note cards and you can study it and study it and study it and study it. You can go to the test and you can like do well on the test, but every hour after the test, you're actually going to lose a portion of that. And neuroscience say, when they study it, is it 80%? Is it 20% after that 80%? I mean, there's so many studies on how much you actually lose. The important thing is that you're going to lose that information unless you've committed it to your unconscious and long-term memory. So that's when you truly know something. When you can perform the behavior, or you can teach someone else the behavior, or you can explain the behavior, you truly know the information. And look at the period of time between when you learn the behavior. If you study for a test, do you still know it a week from now? Do you still know it 2 weeks from now? Do you know it 5 years from now? Those are enduring understandings, and that become part of your true self and understanding of knowing how something performs.
That's awesome. So it sounds to me like one of the ways that we can move memories or learnings from short term into long term is through the mind body connection, because you talked about hand and body movements used to reinforce our learning. So can you talk about like some practical techniques that we can use if we're trying to really grasp something that is important, that is going to be something that we can apply in our lives in a practical way.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the big things is being able to visualize and walk yourself through teaching yourself the concept. So if you can close your eyes, and this is like aside from actually going and performing the task, but if you can walk yourself through something and you can visually see all the elements and explain that to yourself, you're actually strengthening the neural connections. And that's why a lot of times scientists will say that when you learn something, you should sleep, because during sleep, those memories and those in your subconscious or unconscious self and mind, you begin to form realizations of what you've learned. And so if you can teach yourself something and you can visually see yourself doing something, and then you can perform it with your actual self successfully multiple times, it becomes automatic or kind of like ingrained in how you perform a certain task, and you're able to do it. And then you don't think about it anymore. But the reality is, like, how many of us think about brushing our teeth? We really go through and then we get a cavity and we're like, well, I brushed my teeth, but are you really thinking about how you brush every single tooth? You know how to do it, but you become so subconscious. It becomes such a automatic process that we're truly not doing it to the level that we need to do it. So there is this idea of performing visually in like before you actually do it. But ultimately you have to perform the task to know. If you can teach someone else the task in a way that is true to how it's supposed to be learned, then you know if you can do it without looking or asking AI or asking chat or looking it up. I definitely don't want a surgeon, I'll say this on the side, taking me to an operating room and having to ask the phone how to operate on me or ask how to do it. I want them to actually know that and be able to perform it. And think of how much practice they've had to be able to perform that skill. It's kind of like driving. We train truck drivers. I definitely don't want to have a truck driver driving an 80,000-pound vehicle trying to decide in the moment how to drive on a mountain. I really want them to know how to do that before they get on in there next to me in a car. So it's really important that some, specific skills that are safety related. I mean, brushing our teeth is one thing, but driving an 80,000-pound vehicle is a whole nother beast.
Yeah. So one of my big takeaways from everything that you just said is you said neuroscientists will talk about how important sleep is. So one of my big takeaways is that naps are great and I should take lots of naps. But
yes, they are.
I have a question about if we're talking about something like brushing your teeth or a tennis movement, serving really proficiently, or driving a truck, these are all physical movements. But like, what about if we're trying to learn something that doesn't have a physical movement attached to it? So if I'm thinking about like a biology class that I'm taking and I have to learn something about photosynthesis, and I'm like, there's no way that I can physically bring this into my tangible awareness. I'm actually, even now that I'm saying that, I'm like, oh, I definitely see that there is. But what are some tactics for something that doesn't have, a tangible movement that makes sense with a thing? How do you incorporate learning and visualization into something like that?
So it's really interesting. Note taking is something that has been pretty much taken away in a lot of regards in our learning process. Like writing something down and thinking about that as you write it and you look at it and you think about it helps create that reinforcement. When you say 7 plus or minus 2 times, you think about that piece of it. If you're just passively listening to something, that's going to be difficult for you unless you have a neural connection to that information already. Maybe you learned about photosynthesis prior and you've had experience thinking about that process and visualizing that process, but maybe you haven't. So it really depends not only on your ability to think about that topic and what's going to help make that visualization be more concrete, but also when in the past have you had experiences with that topic? And if you haven't, you're going to have to think about it in different ways, maybe draw association to it. Think about building relationships to what you already know about something, because your synapses and what happens, your neural structures, they connect to each other. It's kind of like thinking about your map having a story, and each of those different concrete ends having a different story. So you have to be able to anchor it in something you already know or understand, so that you can then bring it back. If it doesn't connect to anything you've ever known about before, you're going to have to build that neural map because it's brand new. You think about a child who's just learning. Those are the first time they've ever seen anything. And so they're going to continue to learn and relearn about that information and unlearn things like, oh, I touched it, it was hot, I shouldn't do that, to build their understanding of the topic. So you don't necessarily have to actually perform and it has to be a body movement, but you're actually doing that movement inside your head to be able to build that understanding. And I'm really concerned in some ways about not doing more note taking and more thinking about and writing and making a visual map about different concepts, because once you remove that, it takes away that impression that's needed to strengthen that synapse into your long-term memory. And we've, kind of gotten away from a lot of that. Now, typing is similar because you're still typing and looking at it and thinking about it, but there's something about that visualization that really helps the strength of that memory, for
Oh,
sure.
that's interesting. Yeah, I was taking like an anatomy and physiology class, and the professor required us on the essay questions on each of these tests, multiple times a term, he would say, like, you have to write out, a page of it. But one thing that I really appreciated about his technique was, like, he said, if you want to draw something that can show how you understand the concept or create a graph or create a chart, like, that's totally fine. And that was incredibly helpful because it did feel like a different part of my learning that wasn't so exhausted in the language area of my brain. Just felt like so fatigued after reading all these multiple choice questions. It was so nice to have a break from that, and it felt like I was using a different part of my brain by drawing these concepts out. So
That's
yeah, that's
really interesting. It's people ask me this all the time. There's a real big debate in the scientists about learning styles. A lot of people don't in the neuroscience and learning science departments don't like talking about styles because styles implies that you were born with something, like, oh, I was born and I prefer, to learn this way. And so it's not really you were born with a style. What is suggested is that you have a preference. And so attention to learning can be very limited. Within, a fraction of a second, your mind can wander. So you may have if you have a preference, you're saying, like, I'm a visual learner, for example, you may have a preference to that. So you may attend more closely if you are delivered information in that way, which in that way your attention is more focused. So you are taking in more information than if you're like, oh, well, I'm a hands-on learner and you're presenting this, so I'm not really, so you're not attended to it. So there is something to that, but there isn't, like, quote unquote, like, oh, you were born and you prefer to learn this way. It's just a more of a preference to attend to information, which is really fascinating to me because it is true when you ask people, like, people say, well, I have this learning style and they're presenting in this way, but it's like, well, that's probably in some regards you're not as attended as you would be otherwise. And oh yeah, that's probably true. But this idea that people, that's why we always recommend. I just finished a study looking at different ages of brains. So looking at from 0 to 11, like the different generations, because generations is really a stereotype, right? Like this generation, we're hearing all this research, like 0 to 11 is the first, called the Flynn effect. This is the first time in history where this group actually isn't as quick, or as I want to say, as progressed as previous generations. But really what it is looking at the influences and the impact and what they're attending to and how that's influencing learning is quite fascinating, because that is really going to impact not only the future generations, but current generations that have to reach those learners to help them progress, and help them learn.
Well, I have so many questions about that, but I'll ask this first. When you were talking about preferences, so, like, it seems like it's part of the conversation that is always one of the things that, like, someone will get in an intro to psych course of, like, nature versus nurture, or like, are we born with a blank slate? Are we tabula rasa or not? And so, like, are you suggesting then that, like, our preferences do not come hardwired in, but that our preferences are developed through childhood based on perhaps the things that novelty has moved in our developing brains from working our short-term memory into long-term memory.
I love the way that you're talking about this, because it's absolutely like the discussions that are being had, because the idea is that with neuroplasticity in the last 10 years specifically, this ability to see on MRIs and on brain imaging, the ability to progress our brains forward through treatment can happen. And those treatments can actually be like how we feel and how we behave in the environment. So similarly to, I think, just as there's like stereotypes of like gender specific ways of people perform and what they like, and how society kind of puts that in our environments to move us in that direction, it's similar to our own beliefs and how we believe that we learn, and that's how we attend to learning. So everyone really has the capacity to, expand their learning. You see this with individuals that have learning hurdles. This is why I got into the industry to begin with, because I was teaching children with special needs. And I would see that, like, why is that person, like, they can't tie their shoe as easily, but working with them and helping them do it, it's not that they couldn't do it, it's helping them see and helping them perform in a way that they may not have been exposed to before, and helping them move forward and believing in them so they believe in themselves because they've been told they can't do something. So it's really powerful. For sure, it's something that I think everyone has the power to help themselves move forward, even if it's not in a traditional way that society thinks they should move forward.
The question I thought of immediately was, what exactly is the power of belief? How does belief play a role in learning?
Oh my gosh, I love that question. So all of us have neurotransmitters, different chemicals in our brain, and depending on how we feel and how we interact with the environment, those chemicals are released. So, for example, cortisol, dopamine. I mean, there's so many different chemicals that interface in our brain that are actually in our cells that actually move through our body. And there's so much research. This goes back to Albert Einstein, and the research was done with his brain and looking at specific cells and how he performed. And he actually, when they first were introduced to Albert Einstein, for example, they thought, well, he doesn't have a high IQ. And we all know like all the work he did. And so looking at his brain and the chemicals that are inside of each of us can be influenced by technology, can be influenced by the lights and the screens of technology, can be influenced by going out in the trees and taking a walk, and how we feel. Our environment, what we eat and we bring into our bodies, can impact how we feel. What we drink, what we don't drink, pets. I mean, there's just our whole environments can impact the chemicals and how we feel, and how we feel and the chemicals do influence what we remember, emotional resonance, what we remember from a memory standpoint, and our creativity and how we move forward. Sleep is such a huge component of that. How we bring in every day and how we approach every day. When you wake up and you say, I'm going to have a good day, that actually creates chemicals inside your brain that prepare you for that. When you wake up and you say, oh my gosh, it's Monday, here I go again, I mean, that releases a different chemical in our brain. And the reality is we control belief in ourselves, helps us move forward. If you believe someone is a winner, if you believe you are a winner, that helps you move forward. And there's so many studies that show this in psychology. And the reality is science can tell us this, but when you experience it as a human being and you know that it's possible, it can change everything for you.
What is the role of belief and feeling? So like maybe I'm splitting hairs a little bit here, but like what I'm immediately thinking of is people who are saying, "Oh yeah, all you have to do is recite these affirmations and then, and I what I hear you saying is that the way that we prime our brains matters. So when we first wake up in the morning, if we're priming ourselves to start looking for evidence to support whatever belief we have. Like, oh, it's Monday, this is going to be a really crappy day. We're basically like giving our brains an assignment to find evidence that that belief is true. So if someone says, okay, I totally agree with you, like the way that we prime our brains matters for the attention that where we place our attention, but I just don't feel like it's true. Like if I want to have this belief that I'm a winner, but I feel like a loser, like how do I bridge that gap? Like what does that learning look like?
Yeah. So this isn't something that happens overnight. This isn't something like you wake up one day and
Dang
it
it.
happens. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah, this is something that, it takes decades.
Hmm.
I write about it in my book, Thrive, how learning can ignite a new way forward. This is something that you have to make a commitment to and you have to practice. I can harness, like in the darkest and deepest moments in my own life, I can actually harness and feel a light of love inside of me.
Hmm.
And the thing is, that's not something that just happened. That's because you go through these hard and dark times, and your brain knows and experiences it. And you have inside you the ability to imagine a better place, a better feeling inside of you, and you find it inside of you. And you can, it's inside each of us. And the thing is, you have to practice it. It's just like brushing your teeth every day. This isn't something you can just say, I'm a winner and now I feel like a winner, right? It's like I'm a winner and I believe it because I've gone through things in the past that are hard and difficult and I've learned from them, and I'm going to continue to learn and thrive and wake up every day, and I'm going to tell myself these things and I'm going to act in a way that moves that forward. If you're saying you're a winner and you go out and steal a bank, or you go out to a bank and you steal money, I mean, that's not a behavior that's representative of a winner, so it's not only like saying it, but acting in ways that reinforce that in your own life. And you do that not just a day, not a week. I have these jars here. This is like 100 days of sunshine jars, 100 days of like reading. I have little notes here. You can like read them. Like this one says, I attract positivity like flowers attract the sunlight. Little notes, like 100 days. Like this isn't one day of learning. This is a lifestyle of being committed. And it doesn't mean every day is a sunshine and a rainbow, because it's not. I talk to you about, my own life and things that happen, but in those small moments, we go back to the small moments, you have the opportunity to be a winner. If you tell yourself you're a winner, but you don't feel like a winner, and you can wake up and you can go to someone and tell them you matter, you're doing a great job, that's an act of being a winner. And you're going to make that person feel like a winner. You're going to release dopamine and oxytocin inside of you that you're going to feel like a winner. And that's learning.
I love that. It's like I think what I found really helpful about that is that there still has to be action that follows the belief. And that is how the belief is reinforced or changed, is through action. That was one of the things I wanted to ask you about is, we talked a little bit about what exactly learning is and the strengthening of these maps of synapses, or these connections of neurons. How do we go about unlearning something? So for someone who's like, man, I've got this like habit that I want to quit. Like I want to quit drinking, or like in my case, I've like tried to quit drinking Diet Coke like a billion times. Like how do we unlearn something? Or maybe it's not even necessarily a habit, but it could be a belief about ourselves or what's possible for us. How do we go about unlearning or breaking down these maps of synapses?
Yeah, you have to create a new map. You have to create a new way, and you have to receive positive reinforcement for doing it in that other way. So there has to be a reason for that. Whether it's you're at work and they're saying, that's not how we do it here. We do it differently. And you have to learn it. There has to be a reason why behind it, like a meaning behind it. And then you have to reform a new neural map, because you have to build an association, a positive association and doing it in another way. So you kind of rewire that you're still going to get a positive affirmation from doing it the other way. And you have to continually do that. It's not just a one time. You have to do it like 7 plus or minus 2. So do it 9 times. One time, one time, one time, one time, one time, one time, one time. Because you're, again, if this is a new neural map, this is something that you have to do again and again. And look, if there's not a commitment to do it, and there's not a positive reason for doing it, you won't unlearn it. You'll continue to do it the old way. So it's like rebuilding that map of doing it. It's kind of like giving up sugar. Everyone lets sugar's addicting. So sugar is like you want it and your body craves it. And there's no real reason not to have sugar. But when you start getting diabetes or you start, feeling really bad or you start feeling sluggish, all these reasons that maybe you should not have sugar, like you drink Coke every day or whatever, there has to be a reason and it has to feel good not to do it. And there has to be an output for that. And so rebuilding that association is like, it's okay not to have sugar because of this reason. And this is the way I'm going to do it. But you have to see results or otherwise you won't unlearn it.
Is negative reinforcement just as powerful as positive reinforcement, or more?
Absolutely.
So or less so?
I think it depends. It depends on what it is and who the person is. Negative reinforcement can actually not be good depending on the person's motivation and how they react to that. So it just depends on what somebody is motivated by. And what the negative reinforcement is. Like I use the burning of the stove. Like you only need to be burnt by a curling iron or a stove one time not to do it. And that doesn't matter what you're motivated by, right? That is a negative that's going to be powerful. But it depends if someone is someone like responds negatively to negative reinforcement, they're not going to learn either way. They're actually going to probably resist even more to that stimuli because the way that they respond to it is negative. So it doesn't always work, with animals. I mean, there's a lot with Pavlov's theory and training dogs, but people aren't dogs and they're learning. I mean, some of the same principles apply, but we're human. Like we desire human connection. So oftentimes when I talk about moving behaviors forward, it's really understanding what motivates someone and using the reinforcement that aligns to that to move them forward to help them learn.
So when we were talking at the beginning about how novelty cuts down on the times needed to learn something. I mean, my preference is that the novelty would be something that feels really good, that helps, instead of that feels really negative. But it seems to me like most people are, maybe I shouldn't say most people, that's painting with too broad of a brush, but a lot of people tend to kind of act from a place of the things that were most negative and harmful especially in their early memory making as children, and kind of just operate on this, I guess, like an operating system that's based on those the negative novelty of something. And so like for someone who is like really struggling with trying to like undo some of those like core messages or core beliefs about who they are or what the world is like, do you have some, I mean, your advice for it to be repetitive and over a long period of time is super helpful, but like how would you address that with someone?
Yeah, you definitely have to recognize that you have that belief, and it's about letting go. It's letting go that you recognize that part of yourself is part of yourself, and giving yourself grace to let that go and being okay with a new beginning, because the reality is letting go isn't easy. It's actually really hard. That's why a lot of times, people who are alcoholics, they have a really hard time letting go and changing their behavior because of the chemical dependence. This is chemical. This is chemical. This isn't like, don't beat yourself up. This is something that is neural. You're wired by chemicals in your brain to do. So sometimes you need assistance, whether that's assistance. I'm not I'm not a doctor, so I don't give medical advice, but whether it's medication, whether it's, talking to someone or having counseling, because it's really hard to change a chemical reaction in your
Mm.
brain without assistance. People who are depressed and really depressed, that's chemicals inside of you that's happening. And you have to give yourself grace to realize that that's okay, and let it go, and to get the help and support you need to move forward, because it's not easy. It's like grief. I talk about grief a lot. I write about grief a lot, because everyone processes grief and the chemicals that happen in the moment that you experience grief differently. And it's okay to grieve, and you should grieve, and you can love the person forever. And it's thinking about how the chemicals in your brain are there, and they may be preventing you from moving forward. And so it's thinking about how you can, help yourself to help that piece of your mind let go. And so in the book, I give strategies that I write about, of helping people let go, because it is very freeing. And it's not like letting go of the person or letting go of the grief that you have or the love, but it's like moving forward to a place that helps you chemically feel better. Because ultimately, that's the goal, is to help you feel and have the belief and feel better. And that's all controlled in yourself and your cells. It really is. I mean, you control it in your own brain and in your own cells. It's just sometimes you need assistance.
I think that's like such a helpful thing for people to realize, is that everything psychological is biological. That the reason why we think and feel the way that we do is because of chemicals that are passing through our synapses all the time, or hormones that are
Absolutely.
running through our bloodstream. And even just an awareness of, this, it's not some ethereal thing out there that's like happening to me, but there
Right.
are processes in place, and that there are some ways to address some of those processes and change them.
Absolutely. And I like that you say that. People ask me a lot, like, do hormones have an impact on how we feel? And they do. I mean, every cell in our body has an impact. And what impacts those are the influences in our lives and how we think about and process them. And sometimes, they're so strong in the synapse that's happened in our memory, it's going to take decades and years to help move forward. And that's okay, because if you know that your brain has neuroplasticity to change the structure, the size, the chemicals, then that should give you the confidence to know you're not alone, and that we're in this together, and that you can move forward.
For people who are listening to this and don't know what we're talking about when we say neuroplasticity, could you kind of just touch on that for a second, so people are kind of understanding what some of these concepts are?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like many, many years ago, scientists thought that when you were born, every portion of your brain was the size, every chemical was what it was, of yourself until you die. So you're born with the brain. The limits that you have are there, and they are there, and you just have to deal with it. In the last 15 years, because of the technology and the ability to study the layers and the different portion sizes and the chemicals within the brain, scientists have discovered, which is so powerful, through imaging and through kind of doing some simulation and stimulation inside the brain with the technology, that you can actually stimulate different portions of your brain, and make yourself feel better. And also, you can help with memory, you can help with attention, and so forth. And so, this idea of neuroplasticity is your brain, when you're born, you're not like dependent on that. You have the power to continue to grow and learn. And one of the things they found with dementia patients, which is really fascinating, and this is why I'm so passionate about these small moments of connections with other people, is that, you know, a lot of studies with individuals with dementia, a lot of times what happens is the gray and white matter, and I have scans, I just presented this last week, that show the brain is kind of looks hollow, like there's nothing inside the gray and white matter. It's kind of gone. The processing and memories aren't there anymore. And a lot of that can be helped. It's one of those things with this idea of being socially connected and continuing to learn and grow, because that's what helps continue to reinforce those cells and helps us continue to grow in those different areas in our brain. And we are never done learning. Learning and curiosity help continue to build the different structures of our brains to be able to continue to help us move forward. And so I witnessed this with my mom who had dementia. You know, she decided at one point that she didn't want to go out and connect with people because she couldn't drive anymore and she was embarrassed. And one of the things that we know from science is that when you stop connecting with others, it actually impacts the gray matter and white matter in our brains, which in turn impact memory, attention, emotional regulation, these things that we need to feel good. And we're in this time right now where there's research studies. I mean, it's just constant. You see it. It's like 3 years ago, it's like there's these studies that are showing, the Surgeon General came out and said, we're lonely. It's like 1 in 4 people are lonely. And the study just a few months ago said we're unhappy. It's like, if we're focused on that and, you know, we're saying we're unhappy, we're going to continue to be that. But the scary part is if it's true that people are truly isolating themselves because they prefer to be alone, that's an impact on our brains. And it really is. And you can see the regression in the matter, and the gray matter and the white matter in our brains in scans when people isolate themselves. There's actually studies that are showing, this is like horrifying to me. The scrolling, we're scrolling on our phones and we're constantly scrolling on our phones, and that is addicting. It's creating chemicals that are the exact same chemicals as drinking and being an alcoholic. And the reality is it makes you feel worse when you're doing it, but you're addicted to it. So we're addicted to scrolling on our phones. We're craving it. We continue to do it, but it's making us feel bad. And so just being aware of how these behaviors that we're doing are making us feel has an impact on our brain. But the good news, this is the bright news in the end, we all have the power because of neuroplasticity. That was a question for me to define it. I went down a rabbit hole, but we have the power to help us move forward inside of each of us.
That's really exciting. I hope that people will hear this part about scrolling on our phones to be having the same impact on our brains and bodies as drinking, because alcohol is a dissociative substance, and it is a depressive substance. And so while you're doing it, you feel great, but the downstream effects of that are extremely detrimental. And so if we have already, just because of, you know, how our culture is set up to be separated from people, there's this very false belief then that I can connect with people solely online. But that's not true, because if the way that we're connecting with someone also has the same effects on our body and brain as a dissociative habit or substance like drinking, like it still is going to have this deleterious effect on the back end. And so I hope that people can hear that and say, okay, like this should motivate me to get out into my real actual life and to connect with people and put an effort into meeting up outside of these online spaces. I definitely can like get on a soapbox for a long time about this topic. So the other thing I wanted to ask you about, like so when you and I met the first time and you were telling me about your business, one of the things that you were describing to me was how some of the learning models, as we've already talked about, that people have different preferences for learning. And so what you were telling me about was the way that truck drivers in the industry that you work in learn is actually not super helpful to being able to apply the learning into actual physical environments where you need to know those skills. So can you talk about how learning environments are kind of set up, and how you can see that they can be improved upon, and incorporate a wide swath of many different preferences into learning, because this is going to be helpful into then, as we translate it into our personal lives, how we approach learning and neuroplasticity in our own lives.
I love that. Thank you, Morgan, for asking. So I was horrified when I got into trucking. I had a conversation this morning and with a fleet, and the reality is a lot of fleets don't believe that their learners want to learn. That for me is the first sign that there's still, I mean, it's still an issue. Learning is the seed for life. I mean, I just talked about that in the stages of dementia. We have to continue to be curious. So there's 5 interaction modes. And what I saw in trucking is the only interaction mode that you're really using for learning. And I'll go over the different interaction modes. But is learner to content. There's so much content. We are drowning in content. We're scrolling through hours and hours of content. But what we're missing in the content is a few things. One of them is authentic learning. It's one thing to tell someone to be safe in a parking lot, for example. Everyone knows that. You know that. I know that. The drivers know that. Everyone knows. It's not a matter of not knowing to be safe in a parking lot. The reality is when they go down to the grocery store and they have to pull in their huge 80,000 pound vehicle into there's a yellow pole to show them, to be able to immerse them in that environment is truly impactful for them to be able to prepare when they go there to the parking lot. So my biggest thing with learner to content, and that's just one interaction mode, it has to be authentic. It has to be meaningful. It has to draw on those maps that I was talking about when I first started, those neural maps, to bring in authenticity into that person's life. We're adult learners, and this is for all of us probably, if we're working somewhere, has to take like a sexual harassment course. We all know all those principles. It has to be meaningful. It has to be directly applicable to our own environments, especially truck drivers, warehouse drivers, or warehouse workers. Any safety affiliated position really needs to have authentic content, not generic content. And now with AI, content's a dime a dozen. We can generate content all day, but like I said, I'd rather have them know what they're going to be facing in that environment so that they're able to recall and put out the truck fire in the moment when their truck is on fire, instead of trying to look it up on their phone. So that's key with content. It has to be authentic. The second thing is that I just mentioned is most underutilized is learner to learner engagement. We don't ask the drivers what they want to know. I asked this person this morning, like, why aren't you doing discussions? A driver fell asleep at the wheel last night, and luckily they didn't kill themselves or someone, but they completely damaged the vehicle. Why not have that driver come in and connect with another driver and tell them about their experience? I mean, because people want to talk about their own learning, what they know, their own experiences, their own coaching. Learner to learner is the most powerful for that neural connection and synapse, what we just talked about, but we don't use it. Learner to learner. Learner to self. How many times, and I told you this, how many times do these fleets or anyone ask the learners what they want to learn about? Right now they have 50% engagement. And I ask, well, what does the other 50% want to learn about? There's something that they want to do where they're not being involved in the community that we have to tap into. We don't ask them. We don't ask the learners, are they ready to change? If you're texting and driving right now, like I have this bracelet, do you know why you shouldn't do that? I mean, are you ready to make a commitment to do that? And if they say yes and then they don't, that's a behavior change. And we have to really look at the behavior and how we move the behavior forward. So learner to self isn't used a lot in education, in any adult learning. You're just told, take this training, right? It's not like you're not involved in that. Learner to machine. There's so much you can do now within a vehicle. Like I'm sure if you're in your own car, the seatbelt's going off. It's telling you to buckle your seatbelt. That's automatic. But bringing in the data from the vehicles to be able to track actual behavior change is something I'm very passionate about. We actually do that with our technology. There's so many industries that you can actually track behavior change, because that is the key to knowing if someone truly knows something, right? Now, if they become complacent, they know and they don't perform, that's different. But the idea of like seeing behavior change is integral with learner to machine. So you have learner to learner, learner to self, learner to content, learner to machine, and the one that most people are familiar with is learner to instructor. But the reality is the instructor shouldn't be like the sage on the stage as we talk about. It should be a guide on the side and teaching each other how to perform in this coachable way. I'm going to write a paper. That's the next thing I'm going to work on, because I feel like a lot of times people say, yeah, we should be coaching, but you don't really know how to communicate and how people interpret that communication. So I think that's really powerful. But learner to instructor is it's used a lot. It's used at conferences. I do presentations and everyone's passively listening. And I know they're not going to remember most of what I said because they're not note taking and they're not actively engaged in it. They're just passively listening, but learner to instructor. But when I first got into trucking, I would see that these drivers were brought into an orientation room for 5 days. They turn off the light and then they give them a key to a 80,000 pound vehicle. And that's horrifying to me because number one, they're not going to remember. If we know about information processing and how much you remember over time, they're barely going to remember anything they learned in that session. And you would hope that they would get retraining, but a lot of times they just get safety videos. So it's, for me in the industry, I'm really passionate about it because I want them to come home alive and I want everyone on the road to be safe. So, and truck drivers, everything we get is from a truck driver. Everything in our environment was delivered by a truck driver. So they're very integral into our daily lives, even when we don't think about it.
Thank you for sharing all of those interaction modes. I was thinking, like the learner to instructor often ends up being like the same thing as learner to content. Like the instructor becomes just the deliverer of the content. And so I wrote down verbatim that phrase, not the sage on the stage, but the guide on the side. I love that. How do learning preferences then fit into these interaction modes? Because I imagine that even within each of these modes, there's different ways of engaging with whatever the learner is engaging with.
I usually show this chart that has interaction. It's at interaction. Those are types, but interaction modes. And you can actually break it down into different stages. So what I mean by that is when you think about kind of where, what, who, and the environment that it's happening in. So like in terms of what, like when you think of content, like what is the content? Like what is the medium of content, for example? That's just one, like you can slice each of those interaction types up by each of those elements, because you can think about, okay, well, it can be, what's the medium? It could be video, it could be immersion, it could be virtual reality, it could be audio, it could be something they read, it could be read to them. And this idea is if you're doing the same thing for everyone in the same way, you're going to eliminate a lot of different people just by that one what. Now, the other thing is who, like who's doing it? Is it like you said, is it, if you structure a classroom and the instructor is just the delivery of the content, couldn't it be like the learners discussing questions around the topic? I mean, that's a different delivery model, even though the instructor's in the room and the instructor's there to coach, but the who kind of shifts. The when shifts. Why does everything have to be done? Like, when does this happen? Does it happen? Does orientation, does everything, does all the content need to be delivered all at the same time in 5 days? Or why is that? Like, can't you just do, I use this example. This is a good example about when. So I observed an orientation class where payroll was done on the third day, the last hour of the third day. So I mean, there's no way they're going to remember this payroll information, but that's done and they check the box. Well, they learn payroll. They should know the payroll, but they're not going to. So why do that? Because the instructor was like, well, I have to do it. This is the time I have to do it. I'm doing it now. But what if you took that little piece of payroll and you could create a checklist, you could send it out later, you could do a webinar at a later time, like right before they need to know it. Because they're never going to remember it then, but maybe it's the day before the checks come out. Like, what do they need to look for? What should they expect? You could record it. Some people could attend live, no problem, right? Because they want to ask questions, but why do they have to attend live? You could send it out later and they could learn in their jammies. Maybe some people prefer to learn in their jammies, at night, late at night, because everyone's creativity, when you go back to the brain, it happens. Your peak creativity happens at different times for different people. So it could be early in the morning, it could be mid-afternoon, it could be after lunch, it could be at night. So why not tap in and give people the choice of preference of when they learn something, because it doesn't have to be all at the same time in the same way in the same place. So this idea of splitting it up like that, there's synchronous, there's asynchronous, it can happen at the same time. Some things should happen at the same time, but some don't. Let me give you an example. I was at a fleet that was showing everyone how to do the temperature on a reefer trailer. There were like 45 people standing around this reefer trailer. I've never seen it, so it was my first time learning. I could not hear them. I did not know what they were showing. The young lady next to me had never seen it before, and I asked her, how are you going to know how to do this when you actually have to do the trailer? And she was like, I'll just ask my driver or manager. And that was her number one help question. Like, what questions do you get? And they're like, how to use the reefer trailer. It's like, well, yeah. So they're adamant about doing it all at the same time. So they can see their eyes and they know that they're watching this, but we know that their minds aren't there. They can't hear. It's hard to follow. And if someone can't hear, they're not going to speak up. And they're not going to say like, look, I can't hear you. When you're the only young lady in a group of 45 men, you're not going to do that. So why, if you want to do it synchronously at the same time, okay, why not tape it? Why not have like a walkthrough slowly that someone could go refer to anytime? Then they could learn, they could be there in person if they have to be for whatever reason. I would argue they don't, but I mean, I'm not in charge of that, but then they could send it out later. They could learn, maybe they learn best at 2 a.m. They could go in and access that and learn it. Or maybe right before they go in the trailer, they want to see it again. There's so many options for that to support that interaction mode, that it doesn't have to be all in the same place, same way, same time, same person, and so forth. So I'm really passionate about that. And people say, well, Gina, I don't have the bandwidth to do all that. That's why you have technology. There's things that will assist you with that now, that you don't have to be the only person doing that.
I love that. I just bought a car recently, and the dealership was so great about, it was maybe 2 weeks after I bought it, they scheduled a follow-up call with me to see if I had any questions about any of the technology or any problems with, and then they sent me links to short videos on how to do certain programming things that we had talked about in the conversation. And my little Subaru comes with like this feature where you can program this secret button so that you can actually lock your fob in the car. So if you go on a hike, you don't have to carry your key with you. And that's exactly to your point, what you're talking about. I didn't really care about that when I was sitting in the dealership. In the dealership, I wasn't even thinking about going on a hike and leaving my key in the car. I was thinking about, getting the financial stuff all done, all the documents I have to sign. If they had tried to tell me about that then and instruct me on how to do it, I would have been irritated. I would have been like, I'm not going to remember this. But because, and I haven't learned how to do that yet, but I guarantee I'm going to, if I'm like, oh, I know I'm going to go on a hike next week and I want to take my key with me.
Right. I love that.
Yes, that's a perfect example of, one of the things that we don't think about. Anybody who happens to be in any kind of teaching role, whether that's, you're delivering content online or you are a professor or a teacher in a school or whatever, having this idea of when is this information going to be most useful to my learner and how can I make sure I get it into their hands when they need it the most is a really, really powerful question.
Absolutely. Just-in-time learning.
Just-in-time learning. I love that. I'm like already thinking about, some of the things that I'm going to be creating down the road. Like, how are the many different ways that I can build in the preferences for learners into how I'm creating this thing. And that's, thank you for that. Cause that's such a gift to have on the front end of creating something new, is like asking the good questions like this.
Absolutely.
Okay. So we talked a lot about learning and we talked about preferences in learning and how learning works in the brain. Is there is there anything that we haven't covered yet that you're like, Morgan, I have to talk about this. I need people to know this. Or have we touched everything? I mean, I know we haven't because your body of work is extensive, and what you know is you know so much, and I want to talk to you for a million hours. But
Oh, I love that. I think we said it, but I'm really passionate for people who struggle with learning, to know that there are resources to help them move forward in their learning. I think a lot of times, like you said, like people are like, oh, I mean, I'm a winner, but I don't feel like it. Or I can't because I have this like hurdle in my life that I can't get past, or I struggle with ADHD, and I can't focus. It's like I can't. But I just want to help people understand that if they stop saying they can't and say they can and see how, there are resources to help them. Because when you've lost your passion, I've had drivers reach out to me and say, Gina, I've lost my passion for learning. I've lost my passion to move forward. And it's really not a good place at all to be. And to know that there is a light ahead in finding ways to learn, and finding resources and rekindling your passion, because maybe you don't even know what you're passionate about, or what the possibilities are. Like you just see like your immediate environment and what you've been exposed to and what you've learned in the past, like you said, learning and unlearning. But I think there's so much more to even explore, not only in your immediate environment, but how you can help out in other environments and helping other people that can help you move forward and want to move forward for another day. Because every day is a new opportunity to change someone's life and to help somebody, and everyone has that power. No matter what your learning hurdle is, you have the power to grow a positive thought and to grow in someone else's life. So I just really appreciate like meeting you and like talking about this, because it can really change someone's life. And I think that is what's so powerful about learning.
I agree. I wrote down what you said, that learning is the seed for life. Learning is the seed for life. It's the curiosity is the thing that keeps us going and keeps putting out little feelers. And I really like what you said about, if you are in this spot where you feel stuck, or you feel like you've kind of lost your passion or your zest for life, there are things available to help. And one of the best ways is to just reach out to someone and have that in-person connection, and start to develop relationships with people who are doing the things that you want to do, because then that really bolsters your belief as well.
Absolutely.
Wow. Well, I will, of course, link everything in the episode notes so people know where to find you and can look at, some of the tools that you've developed, and the program and the company that you've created is really inspiring. And just thank you for sharing your time and your wisdom with us today.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for
Yeah.
being so beautiful. I'm like so honored to know and have met you, and maybe someday we'll meet in person.
We for sure will. Let's just put that in the universe right now.
Yeah, let's do
I love
it.
it.
Let's do it. Thank you so
Awesome.
much. Have a really beautiful day.
Yeah, thank you. And for all my listeners, before we go, P.S.